How was the discussion? Was it helpful? Are you do you feel more informed? More aware? All right. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to give some information about something called anxiety disorder. We'll break off into small groups again, and then you'll do the same thing. So there are three different types of anxiety disorder that I want to address. One's called generalized anxiety disorder. The next one is called panic disorder, and then the other one is called socialized anxiety disorder. Okay. Oops. So generalized anxiety disorder is most commonly diagnosed for people with anxiety disorder. It's excessive worry and negative expectations daily for at least 6 months. Do you have any worries generally? Do you notice how whatever it is that you're worried about, it is the same thing that you worry about persistently? Okay. When you know, either because you are not doing anything to fix the problem or deal with the problem, or you're trying to avoid the problem, whatever it is that you're worrying about, it will stay with you. It generally stays with the same person if you don't deal with it. Okay, so I generally tell the clients that I see, what are you worried about? What are top 3 things that you feel most worried about, and top 3 things that you think about on a daily basis for kind of like a prolonged? It becomes a habit, right? You just kind of think about the same thing. For an example, if you're in college, most of you are, I presume, you're probably worried about not passing classes. Okay, so each time that you worry about, okay, I'm worried that I'm going to fail my class, that's going to persist. And each time you worry, it's going to feel heavier. Okay, and when there is no help because you're not reaching out with, hey, are you worried about the same thing? What do you do about it? Or go and get some professional help to deal with this worry. It's going to turn into something called anxiety. And it happens in the brain. It's chemical imbalance. There's a chemical alteration where now the constant worry now produces so much more stress hormones in the brain that now it becomes something called anxiety. And then when generalized anxiety disorder is diagnosed, it's because somebody has been living this way for at least 6 months, which is a really long time. So you can imagine how the brain must be suffering greatly from just the overload of stress hormones, because this condition of living is almost intolerable for the person because it's really painful. Okay, panic disorder, this happens a lot when the anxiety persists past 6 months. Okay, so this is when attack of fear and loss of control, it literally feels like a heart attack, because now you are worried. You are moving from being worried about failing a class or not passing a class. It turns into an anxiety disorder where now you feel extremely anxious about, oh my gosh, I'm not going to pass, I'm not going to pass, I'm not going to pass. What is that going to mean? Now my whole life's going to stop. It turns into a panic disorder where now it becomes this internalized condition that your entire body suffers from. Okay, so many times when medical doctors in the emergency room, when they have somebody who gets rushed into the ER and they ask various questions, and when somebody asks, when somebody says, I can't breathe, they'll say, okay, what? They'll go down. Do you feel numbness in your arms? Do you feel like your heart is pounding out of your chest? So they'll ask these questions that would indicate heart attack. Every single one of the symptoms that indicates a heart attack, a person who is experiencing panic disorder says yes. They literally feel like they're having a heart attack. Their heart is pounding out of their chest cavity. Okay, this is very serious. But the medical doctor says, okay, you're not having a heart attack. I want you to take this, and hands them a brown paper bag and says, I want you to breathe. No, doctor, I'm having a heart attack. I don't need a brown paper bag. No, you're not having a heart attack. You're having a panic attack. you need to breathe. So the brown paper bag is given. That's the medical advice from a medical doctor, and that is the only way a panic disorder is treated. Okay. Sometimes it can get really bad where a person is hospitalized and they do give some sedatives to calm the person down. But the only thing that a doctor would do when a person is having a panic attack is to make sure that he or she is breathing, because you have to breathe in order to stay alive. And then after things calm down a little bit and you are able to breathe at a normal level, then they'll send you right back home. Okay? So it's very treatable. However, people who don't really deal with their anxiety issues, I mean, next thing you know, they're going to the ER 5, 6, 7 times because they think they're having a heart attack. Okay? So again, getting professional help and intervention is really important, because if you've ever been to an ER, you don't want to go back there, right? Socialized anxiety disorder. This is when a person suffers from extreme self-consciousness and self-judgment. And a lot of Korean Americans suffer from social anxiety disorder. Why? Again, because of the Confucianism-based philosophy of life of you have to be the smallest invisible person in the room because everybody else is so much more important. This idea instills in a person to be afraid of the group. Why? Because the group adds so much stress on the individual. Why? Because they always have to please the group. They always have to make sure that the group is happy. They always have to make sure that they don't take any attention away from the group. This is the philosophy that is instilled in a lot of Korean Americans. And so the minimization of the self causes a person to always be nervous about what the group must be thinking of them. And it's almost always very negative. Why? Because the self is already minimized. So you don't think very highly of yourself anyway. So you're going to assume that what everybody else thinks is just the worst. Well, if you find yourself in a room full of people who are thinking the worst things about you, or your perception of them is that they're thinking the worst thing about you, you're not going to want to stay there. So the person goes away and isolates himself. By isolating himself, the anxiety gets worse, the depression gets worse, and it kind of goes in a downward spiral. Okay? So what can we do? Anxiety disorder kind of looks like this, where symptoms of anxiety disorder is, where did it go? Okay, so I think I had an extra slide, but I don't really have to have it. So the impact and stress of anxiety is such that it's really important to pay attention to your health, right? Because if you don't have your physical health, you're not going to have your emotional health. Because your physical health, your emotional health, psychological well-being is all, spiritual well-being, it's all connected. So if you're suffering from one, everything is going to suffer, okay? So a person who is experiencing a very high increased amount of stress that leads into anxiety oftentimes will experience something called acid reflux. Has anybody experienced any kind of indigestion or heartburn, acid reflux? If you're experiencing a lot of that where you have to have medication, like Prilosec, which used to be only by prescription, or even like Gaviscon, which is antacid, if you're finding yourself needing that, then something's going on with your lifestyle that needs to be managed because you're experiencing too much stress, okay? If you look at the red one, red bar indicates anxiety sufferers, and the yellow bar indicates just normal adult population. Acid reflux is a human condition where some people, they're just kind of programmed with it. Their organ just functions that way. So there are up to 12% of the adult population across the United States that suffer from acid reflux. It's a very painful experience if you've ever experienced it. But when there is extra stress added and there's now anxiety, up to 30% experience acid reflux. And when acid reflux goes untreated, you have to fix it surgically. And you don't want to go through this because they do terrible things with your intestines. they have not, I shouldn't say they do terrible things. They have to really take care of your intestines so that you don't have this constant reflux, which is a very painful experience. You don't want to go that extent if you don't have to. Okay. Allergies, again, people who suffer from stress, their level of experiencing allergy symptoms is 27% compared to average adult population that is 11%. Because what happens is when your body is so hyper aroused by different stressors, what happens is your stress hormones that are being produced. One of the functions of stress hormone is to reduce your immune system. The cortisol, the stress hormones, literally in the brain blocks those receptors that has to catch your immune system, the T cells and the B cells. Is anybody familiar with immunology? Okay, those receptors specifically has to bind to these antibodies that your body naturally produces so that you can stay healthy. It's happening to you right now, even as you're sitting there. Okay, that's why you're not sick. But what happens when cortisol is released, it blocks those receptors so that the antibodies can't grab onto the receptors that's necessary to produce immune response. So allergies happen, okay? Children with very stressful family environment, for an example, lower socioeconomic class, have twice as many allergy symptoms compared to children from a more stable, healthier, tends to be a higher socioeconomic class of family. Why? Because children with overproduction of cortisol, they really just cannot stay healthy, no matter what, because the overproduction of cortisol won't allow it. Does that make sense? Backaches. We talked about this before. Anytime you have anytime you have too much stress in your life, and please make sure that you think for yourself, what do I do every single day? What does my morning look like? Do I eat breakfast and lunch? What does my afternoon look like? Do I eat dinner? And if you say yes, okay, what time do I eat breakfast? Is that at a reasonable time, like 8 or 9 in the morning, or am I eating a brunch, at 11 o'clock, and I consider that breakfast? You have to make sure, in human bodies, most human bodies work the same way, okay? That's why we have one big medical book, because there's a lot of generalizations that goes into how the normal human function is maintained. So make sure that you just kind of always check with yourself and ask yourself, what am I doing every single day to make sure that I minimize and regulate the stress level as much as I can? Because the age-old saying is really true. Stress kills, and it kills all the time, okay, because it's unmanaged. Asthma, 16% higher compared to 7% for a normal adult population. Fatigue, stress is exhausting. Have you ever been really stressed and you just, you feel like you could sleep forever? Severe, people suffer from something called chronic fatigue syndrome, and a lot of times people who suffer from this also has had a history of very, very stressful lifestyle that never got managed. And so they basically become exhausted in life, and they suffer from something called chronic fatigue syndrome, meaning they're exhausted all day long. It's a terrible condition to have, but you can prevent it, or you can manage it if you can manage your stress level, okay? Now, and of course there's migraine, which is in the picture that you just saw. But now, having said that, I also want to go back to the Confucius philosophy that a lot of Korean Americans still live by. Do Korean Americans talk about stress? Do they talk about stress management? Do they talk about what am I doing when I get stressed? To talk about coping skills or how to relax? It's very, very unlikely, okay? Why? Because, again, according to the Confucius philosophy, is you have to work. The ethics of work is so severe that even when you experience the highest amount of stress, the kind of stress that kills you, you're supposed to suck it up and don't talk about it. Okay? This ideal can really push a person not to open up in any way, shape, or form, especially when they're so stressed, when they most need to open up and talk about it and externalize their stress. Instead, what happens is they literally eat the stress, which is basically going to end up in these symptoms in the body. Okay? Treatments, talk therapy, again, very similar to depression, emotional regulation and mindfulness, and then, of course, medication. There's a lot of anti-anxiety medications that are out there, especially when a person has uncontrollable panic attacks. A lot of times medication is one of the only things that can help. But again, when a person is able to say, you know, I'm experiencing symptoms of anxiety and is able to detect that early, come and get help early, then you don't have to go the distance of getting on medication, okay? Because there's a lot of different ways to treat it in a natural way. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and break you guys up into small groups again. Everybody has a handout that kind of looks like this. It says how to deal with stress and anxiety. I'd like for you guys to just read it to yourselves and talk with your group, particularly with what you want to work on. Nobody does this perfectly, okay? We all need to learn to manage our stress and anxiety on a daily basis. So if you, of all the things that are listed in your list, that are written in your list, if you feel like, okay, I need to really try to exercise more often. Exercise is the best thing for the body, okay? Both physically and emotionally, when you exercise, you pump out so many feel-good hormones in the brain, and your body's in a relaxed state is the best thing for any ailments. So if you feel like, I just don't exercise, which again, in the Korean culture, exercise is not emphasized. It's really unfortunate. But especially for women, like you're not supposed to exercise. You're just supposed to sit at home and don't move. That's really what's taught in Confucius ideology. If you're a woman and if you want to be this sort of exemplary woman, you're supposed to be so very inactive. And I don't even know why that's even an idea, but we have to exercise, okay? You have to get out, and I'm sure you've all heard, 20 minutes of walk 3 times a week is enough for the body to maintain that state of relaxation and maintaining the state of health. So it's not much. If you can just get out and walk for 20 minutes a day, you're doing great, right? But you have to do something. You have to really get out and do some exercise. So anyway, that's just an example. If that's what you want to focus on, ask yourself and ask the people in your small group, okay, so what do you do for exercise? Like, get some information that will be helpful for you to accomplish your goal. Make sense? Okay.